All right, guys, I want to talk to you guys about a subject that I've been really discussing since January of 2020, and that is the decade of the 20s being a decade of military buildup. And there is so much evidence for this. It's not even a conspiracy. People think, oh, he's being conspiratorial. He's just spreading out some crazy conspiracy theories about 2020. No, 2020 has the decade of the 20s has already began, and look how crazy it already is. So no, not a conspiracy at all. The decade of the 2020s is going to be a decade of military innovation and buildup all over the world. And we see so much evidence for this. It's crazy how many governments are talking about the 20s being a decade of military innovation. You look at what the Greeks have been talking about, the Turks, the Brits, the Germans, the Japanese, the Chinese. They have all been talking about the decade of the 20s being a decade of military advancement. And I just saw an article that came out recently, and it was on the Chinese military. And the Chinese military plans that by the year 2027, so 7 years from now, by the year 2027, the Chinese military is going to be in a very advanced condition in innovation to the point where China will be able to handle a serious full-out war. Who that war would be with, I can't say emphatically, but knowing a little bit about the politics of the Far East, I would say the Chinese are looking at the Japanese. Because if there is anyone that the Chinese hate more than any other country, it's the Japanese. The Vietnamese have problems with the Chinese, but the Vietnamese aren't an existential threat to the Chinese. The Chinese have had problems with the Philippines, but the Philippines are not an existential problem to the Chinese. The biggest threat to Chinese power in the far northeast are the people of the rising sun, the Japanese. The Japanese butchered millions upon millions of people in China during the Second World War. They did horrific human experiments under the Japanese military unit, Unit 731, which was just a bunch of sadistic psychopaths who were doing horrific experiments on people. Absolutely evil. If you ever want to read about the full epitome of evil, read about Unit 731. They were just as horrific as Joseph Mengele, but there was just a whole team of Joseph Mengeles. And who protected Unit 731 after the Second World War? Oh, it was the Americans who just wanted to protect these evil scientists in order to get their scientific knowledge. So, yeah. All of the atheists out there who keep talking about the preeminence and the importance of science over everything. Well, there you have it, everyone. There's a great example of science over everything, even over morality itself. Doesn't matter if you are a mass murderer. We want your knowledge because science trumps everything. So the Chinese military has been talking about the year 2027 being a year being a year in which they plan that the Chinese military will be heavily advanced and able to fight a full-scale war. The Chinese military is not the greatest military in the world, regardless of what a lot of the neoconservatives like to think. They keep talking about, oh, the rising China and the Chinese military is so scary. Oh, my God, they're going to, I don't know. They have machine guns that shoot out grains of rice or something. The Chinese military is heavily lacking. The Japanese military is way more advanced than the Chinese military. The Chinese military is heavily lacking. There are certain parts of the Chinese military which are advanced, but at the same time, they are parts of the Chinese military which are heavily lacking and are in want of actual adequate equipment. And they even have outdated equipment. And sometimes, in some parts of the Chinese military, they are just getting some more recent technology. So they are falling behind heavily. And so Xi Jinping, I'm trying to pronounce this guy's name as best as possible. Xi Jinping wants to make it so that by the year 2027, China will have and I'll quote from him, he said, China would build a modern socialist country that is prosperous, strong, democratic, culturally advanced, and harmonious. It basically means we can kick ass. Now, what's interesting is that initially the Xi Jinping government, the Xi Jinping regime, projected that by the year 2049, China will reach this advanced military state. But they said, well, maybe that's a little too far off from now. Let's make it a little bit more close to today. So they switched it to the year 2035. Now they're talking about the year 2027. So they're making it more early. Why? I think it's because they know something really big is going to happen very, very soon. And so they want to use these next 7 to 10 years as their opportunity, their time frame to advance their military state. There's a really good quote here from a Japanese journalist. His name is Katsuji Nakazawa, and he says, "What kind of military advancement does China envision by 2027? The Ministry of National Defense seems to be unsatisfied with the current status of the military. The ministry has said that while China's economy has become the world's second biggest, its military is not commensurate to the nation's economic power. With the 100th anniversary in sight, Xi is planning a new strategy, attending a military training meeting of the Central Military Commission. On November 25th, Xi ordered the armed forces to strengthen training under real combat conditions and raise their capability of winning wars. China also has a 5-year plan, which would be from the years 2021 to the year 2025. And one of the priorities of this 5-year plan is, quote, elevating the level of national security. And according to Dean Cheng, the purpose of this 5-year plan is so that the, quote, PLA, the People's Liberation Army, will be fully mechanized and informationized by 2027. The Germans in the European Union are talking about the decade of the 20s also being a decade of military innovation. In fact, the EU is already planning on issuing a document detailing what type of innovation that they want to commit to in order to make the EU military force a very, very, very global military machine that could compete with the United States. And they are saying that by the year 2022, this document will be released. So it's happening, guys. They want military innovation, military buildup. The Greeks are right now working on their own F-16 fighter jet, with the help of the Americans, of course. And the Greeks have said that by the year 2027, this fighter jet will be flying in the air. The Turks right now are working on their own fighter jet. And the Turks have said that this fighter jet will be flying in the air by the year 2027. So there's something to be said about this year 2027. It's very fascinating. I'm going to put myself out on a limb here, and I'm going to give you guys one of my little, how do I put it, intuitive suspicions. The year 2007 was a year when the economic crisis began. The economic crisis accelerated an entire global movement of nationalism and populism. This is reflected by the rise of movements like Occupy Wall Street, and also Catalonian nationalism became very big in the economic crisis that hit Europe soon after. And a lot of the nationalism that we've been seeing in Europe right now, a lot of this stuff really began to cultivate in the economic crisis, which began in 2007. Now, another thing that happened in 2007 was the officiation of the of the counter-jihad movement, the anti-Islam movement. There was a meeting in Brussels. It was the 2007 counter-jihad summit, and it took place in the European Union Parliament, the EU Parliamentary Building. And present in this meeting was Robert Spencer, Pamela Geller, and this meeting was actually organized by a Nazi by the name of Philip de Winter, who was a Flemish separatist. And the counter-jihad movement is what brought forth other movements like the EDL and also Pegida in Germany. And so the counter-jihad movement really was a precursor to the more racist, more racial wave that we saw 10 years later in 2017. In 2017, we saw the rise of a lot of the alt-right type groups. We also saw the rise of various right-wing political parties, racist political parties, and also separatism in Catalonia. For example, the Freedom Party in the Netherlands won a big election. The Freedom Party and the it was the Freedom Party and it was was it the People's Party or something like that? It was in Austria. They won a big election. The Austrian People's Party, and the Freedom Party, they won a big election in Austria in 2017. There was the Forum for Democracy Party in the Netherlands, which won, I want to say, one seat in one parliamentary seat. So they began to grow in prominence in 2017. The AfD grew in prominence in Germany in 2017. Also, what happened in 2017 was Catalonian nationalism and separatism became very popular. Another thing that happened was that the EU began to seriously accelerate the discourse on making a pan-European military force. So all these weird things started happening in 2017, 10 years after the beginning of the economic crash. Now, 10 years later, which will be 2027, they are already talking about this year being a year of massive military innovation. So it's very interesting. 2007, 2017, 2027. It's weird. That focus on 7 years, that pattern of 7 years. I find it super fascinating. But anyway, that's something for you guys to think about. The 2020s are going to be a very turbulent time. It's going to be crazy. It's already crazy. Look at us. We can't go into the grocery store without wearing masks. So, yeah, anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.